Ruthless Compassion is a podcast about how you can turn your emotional shit into fertilizer for success and see your darkest moments as opportunities to transform into a powerful kindness warrior. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review wherever you listen. Welcome, David Sax, to the Ruthless Compassion podcast again.
Good to be back here, Marsha. Thank you.
My pleasure. So you've come back with a new book called The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World. And I was asking you just before we started taping, like why you wrote it. So maybe you'll say a couple of words about that.
Yeah, this book was a response to two things. One, the situation I was sort of living through during the peak of the pandemic, 2020 and early 2021. As it related to how much digital technology I was using. I mean, it was sort of doing everything in my life through a screen at many points of that time. And what it was revealing about the sort of deeper value of the non-digital analog things that I kind of had to leave behind. And the other was questions I was getting in interviews in the media and, other places that it was coming from about what this experience meant about the future. That now that we were sort of in the new normal of remote work and virtual school and online shopping and so forth, and there was this assumption that there was no returning back to what was before. What did this mean for sort of the analog things that I had been writing about and championing, whether it was brick and mortar shops or schools or physical objects like vinyl records and board games and so forth. What did this mean that those things were vanishing because everything was sort of going digital, and this was my kind of response against that somewhat ridiculous question.
Yeah, well, it's funny that the expression "be careful what you wish for" popped into my mind, and here we are. We were all wishing for this, this great digital era where everything was going to be online and it was going to be so amazing, and then it happened with a vengeance.
You're like,
and
there's nothing I would love more than sit at home and work in my sweatpants and have pad thai brought to me. Like, wouldn't that be a dream? And then you're like, well, here you go. You can never leave your house. But here you go.
Yeah,
all the Netflix you can watch.
You have obviously done some research, you've interviewed people, and, obviously we all have reactions to this constant being on a screen. But what have you discovered, through your interviews, through your research about, what it feels like, what it means to constantly be plugged in?
Interesting. Well, I think the thing we all realized very quickly, and the research sort of began to bear this out, and had been doing so for years prior to the pandemic, is that humans have bodies. We're not computers. We're not virtual beings. We're not pieces of data. And those bodies have limits and needs, right? We have the need to utilize our physical senses that we've evolved to navigate our way through the world with. Our eyes need to see beyond this flat piece of glass that I'm staring at, and then the other flat piece of glass that I can look at, right? Our ears need to hear in a textured way beyond just what you can sort of plug into them or come out through a speaker. Our fingers need to touch, and our feet need to touch different things in order to gain information. Our limbs and our bodies need to move through space and not just sit in one place. And this was sort of something I think we took for granted, that these were problems that needed to be solved or disrupted. But what we found when we removed all those sensory experiences, when we removed our bodies from the equation, was that we were tremendously unhappy and unfulfilled. I mean, the terms burnout was something that came very quickly to the fore in the spring of 2020. And, I think a lot of that can be traced back to the fact that, we were not using our bodies. We were not using our full capabilities as humans in the day-to-day activities that we previously would have done by walking or taking the bus or driving to go to work, by walking to a grocery store, by meeting people and having conversations. We could simulate many of these actions online, but it wasn't the same, right? It's the Peloton bike riding in front of a screen versus getting out and riding on the road. It's the difference between online school and virtual school, right? And the insufficiency of that for our daily human experience became very apparent very quickly.
Yeah. You were saying something which in the book, which reminded me of something I had been thinking about, which is that we have all these spontaneous kind of interactions with people, these casual interactions, which are not with friends or loved ones or with, people that we're close to, but they're these very, brief, but very positive interactions with people. And all the spontaneity was gone, right? So all of our interactions had to be planned and organized and scheduled and choreographed, as opposed to just having these like spontaneous experiences. And it brought me back to a memory of traveling, because I spent quite a few years doing some very intensive global traveling, doing my bucket list of traveling. And one of the things that I always noticed when I traveled was how free I felt, because my time was very unstructured and we could just do whatever we wanted and just be very free and loose, and things would just magically happen. People would appear, events would appear, experiences would arise, and all of this incredibly spontaneous flowing would happen. And I was so happy and fulfilled during those experiences. And it wasn't just because I was in a new place, having new experiences. It was all that flow, the flow experience. And being in this technology, I think it kills all the flow. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's a really poignant way to put your finger on the thing that I think we kind of came to the realization of, right? Which is that, yeah, that software does not do well with spontaneity, right? Because it requires rules and structures based around whatever activities you're doing. So let's talk about conversation. A channel like Slack, which is a platform people use for conversation, or perhaps something like Twitter, whatever, right?
Mhm.
These are sort of platforms for different types of conversation, text conversation,
Yeah.
voice conversation, and so on. Zoom is another good one. It only works when both parties are sort of agreeing upon the set rules of engagement, so to speak, and things are happening within the confines of that platform. The best example, your sort of travel one's a great one. I mean, the best example that I like to say, and I've been doing this in the talks I'm giving lately, is I'm going to tell you the 3 scariest words in the English language that come out of the pandemic, besides the medical stuff, right? Um, uh, Zoom cocktail party, right? And I say in the talks, I'm like, if I paid you $25, who would attend, a 1 hour long Zoom cocktail party? And maybe one cheapskate puts up their hand.
Yeah.
I said $50, and 3 people will be like, $100. Be like, all right. And then I'll go, I got $100. I'm like, all right. But that experience, the boredom of that experience
Yeah.
is so perfectly encapsulates
Yeah.
everything that is lost when we digitize our analog world, right? Because what is a cocktail party? It is a space, a room, a backyard, or whatever, and a bunch of people and some drinks, ideally, maybe some food, maybe some music, and like that's it. There's no set plan. The spontaneity of the encounter is just left up to our evolutionary way of communicating and living as humans. And that unfortunately just can't happen in a limited, I don't know, 4 square inch, 20 square inch flat piece of glass, right? I think that it's funny. People ask me, what's the most surprising thing you learned? I think the most surprising thing I learned is that people were shocked when this stuff didn't work, right? They're like, I don't know, we had, just a Zoom cocktail party and it sucked. I'm why? Why are we shocked about this? The failure of online school, right? Which happened all over the world, every grade,
Yeah.
every type of school. There's no success stories from this.
No.
And it had been known, and people had tried experiments in this years and failures, across the board. It's like, oh, why didn't that work? We had the best teachers and the best minds and the best technology, and Harvard and MIT and fancy private schools near where you live. And it's like, why did the entirety of the school experience, like condensed into the screen, not equal what it was in real
Yeah.
life? How are we shocked about this?
I think people are missing the obvious. Like they're missing the forest for the trees, which is that it's not just about, you know, read this, study this,
Yeah.
regurgitate this on a test or an essay, and that's school. Like school is social. Like the whole point of school, from, nursery school to postgraduate, medical school, residency, it's all social. Like, so much of it is the social
Well,
experience.
and the social experience. I think people say, well, we have social media, we have social, you can be social online, you can communicate with people all over the world and do things. But, as a psychiatrist, right?
Mm.
When we talk about social, it's not just the information that we can turn into text and video and sound. It's all the other things. When you see a patient and they come into your office and sit down on your Teams chair or whatever, what I imagine is a very nice couch chair. I'm sure things that they are saying, that is the context of it, but there's also their body language, how they're communicating with you non-verbally, everything you've sort of had in the interactions with them even before they've come in. So I think because we've been able to take many pieces of information about the world and transfer it digitally in a very fast and efficient way, we've sort of made the assumption, and I think many people in Silicon Valley and the technology industry have made it the goal to synthesize, and capture the rest of that information. And that if we could just get enough information and, put it through this pipe here, the pipe of the internet, then that's great. And I think this is the goal of Mark Zuckerberg's new shift to the metaverse, right? It's like, just going to strap the things on, goggles on your face, and this is it. We'll be able to capture all the rest of this stuff, the body language and the whatever.
It's not true.
But it's missing,
Soul.
all the
It's
details.
missing the
And when we talk
soul.
about the trees,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like a forest isn't just trees. It's
Right.
I was in book tour last week in Oregon. I went for a hike in Portland, Oregon, which is a city that has gorgeous parks.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful
Yeah.
park called
Yeah.
Washington Park, kind of towers above the city. It just rained, so it's like the misty Oregon, Pacific Northwest. I'm hiking up, and it's like the sound of the water dripping and the feel of the moss and the smell of all those needles and trees and leaves decaying and the crunch on the path, and all of that's the experience.
So
Right?
what you're saying is there's no layers. There's no layers because in real life there's so many layers of experience, right? There's, like you were saying, the sound and the smell and the feel and the various different sights, the foreground, the background, the midground, right? The many different things that you're hearing all at the same time, and it's all coming together like this big soup, right? And in electronic technology, there's like so little. There's no layers, there's so little content, and it's exhausting because you don't have anything to kind of, it's like just, it's like a very thin broth with just one ingredient, and
It's
it's like
the
the
it's
same
the
ingredients over and over.
the nor
Yeah.
cube in the water, right?
Yeah,
Which
and
is
with like the same flavor over and over.
which is fine. I mean, it's okay. My daughter loves herself a packet of ramen, Mr.
Yeah.
Noodles, right? And I'd liked when I was a kid growing up and getting the Lipton cup of, that like
Cup of
my mom
soup,
would
yeah.
stir that crap in a thing, and she's like, I want my matzo ball soup, and I was like, I want this stuff, want that salty brine. But yeah, it's exactly right. It is the infinite texture of the real analog world and everything
Yeah.
within it, the physical aspects of it, the social aspects of it, all of that richness. I think what the pandemic did is, by taking it away and giving us the digital substitute, whether it
Yeah.
was shopping, socializing, praying, exercising, learning, working, even the way we would entertain ourselves or interact with the city, right? We very quickly saw the that the signal was weak.
Yeah, it wasn't fulfilling. And people talked about Zoom fatigue, right? I mean, that's a new word from the pandemic, right? Zoom fatigue. And it was real. It's like, the other day, like, my accountant wanted to talk to me about my year end, and he said, we'll do like a meeting, right? We'll do an online meet. I said, no, let's just talk by the phone. I can't do any more of these
Yeah.
online in-person meetings, just to talk about numbers. No, let's just do it by phone. And it's it's just not fulfilling in the way that interpersonal face-to-face relationships are, and it's exhausting in a way that interpersonal face-to-face relationships aren't. You're not
Yes.
ever going to be tired having a chat with the checkout clerk at the grocery store. It'll be like, oh, that was nice. But 5 minutes with my accountant on a Zoom on a meeting, it's like, no,
Your
I
poor
can't.
accountant. Your poor accountant.
Yeah. No,
Um,
he understood. He's very sweet.
yeah, yeah. It is. Again, it's this deeper human need, and I think this is the thing that I talk about. People say, well, what about in the future? There's going to be better technology, new technology, and I say, of course, that better
Always.
technology is coming. The new technology is coming. AI, whatever, right? But
Yeah.
we are analog creatures. And that's going to be true in the future too. And in
Hopefully.
20 years and 50 years and 100 years and beyond, until we're drowning ourselves in extinction with climate change, we are physical creatures, just like your
Yeah.
cat in the background there. He's doing a
What
wonderful
cat?
job.
There's no cat.
Stupid metaverse. And as long as that's true, those needs are going to remain, right? Those deeper human needs. And I think what you see now is really interesting because there was this assumption early in the middle of 2020 that this was this sort of irreversible shift toward a more digital lifestyle. People were not going to return to offices. That was over.
Yeah.
This sort of, many of these things would become permanent. Look how much online shopping had grown. Look how much grocery shopping had grown. Look how much people are streaming concerts and things online. This was the new way we were going to live. And what you've actually seen in the past year or so is all the fortunes of those companies, Zoom,
Yeah.
Amazon, Shopify, Peloton, they've all declined. Their sales are way
Yeah.
down. Their numbers are
Yeah.
going back to where they were at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of the number of people that are using their sales. And that's because people are looking at their Peloton bike in their basement, and they're looking at their bicycle in their garage and the world outside, and they're like, yeah, it's a nice day. I'm gonna go outside.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. It's having all this. I would use the word sterile. This kind of sterile technology is keeping us from the messy, spontaneous, unpredictable, multi-layered aspects of normal human existence. And yeah, like people were starving, I think, through the pandemic, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is why everyone was doing so much baking. I think we were emotionally starving, and so we were feeding our bodies because we couldn't feed our spirit, our being. But once we could, so many people returned and even turned for the first time to things that they had never really appreciated before. I started walking during the pandemic. I had always gone for a walk here or there, but I started like walking every day, and it's like a new passion of mine, and I never would have done that except I needed to get outside and just walk around and see whatever was out there. And sometimes it was just noisy construction, and sometimes it was beautiful trees, sometimes it was cute pets, whatever it was good, right? Because it was alive. There was an aliveness. There was not a sterility to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that what, Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do is he's trying to sterilize life. And it's frightening to me. It's actually like a out of a bad horror sci-fi novel,
But not a good one, a bad one. I mean, I
No,
think
like a
that the
bad one. Yeah.
heartening thing is, despite the billions of dollars that he's poured into this, no
Yeah.
one's signing up. People are,
Great.
anyone who's getting the testing for this, journalists and other people
Yeah.
are like, yeah, I went on there. There was no one there.
Yeah.
It was a ghost town.
Good.
And
Yeah.
I think that's because it holds such limited appeal. There's an entertainment appeal, there's a curiosity appeal, but like as a venue for the way we're going to sort of conduct our lives in the future, it's a very limited appeal. I think that's the blessing of the past couple of years, is that it gave us this immersion or test drive into this promised digital future. And the
We did the
majority of
beta
us,
testing. Yeah.
yeah, the majority of us are like, no, not go back
Yeah.
there. Like
Yeah. And,
I'll do certain activities online. Some people are like, I'm
of
great, I'm happy
course,
with online shopping now, or I don't want to drive back down to an office that's an hour away, or, certain things. But for the most part, we've elected um, for analog reality, and all of its, as you said, warts and all, right? And I
yeah.
find that interesting because you're a psychiatrist, so one of the things I've heard a lot over the past while as I've been doing this is like, well, what about introverts, or what about people who, for example, in the office world, like there were tremendous inequalities between the people who may have held power in an office, usually white males, and women, people of color, other disadvantaged groups. So doesn't this, putting work online make it better? Isn't that sort of a solution? And I always said, well, for introverts, for people who are shy, for people who are disadvantaged in things, isn't the goal to make those physical spaces better? Like to actually, if
Yeah.
someone's an introvert, do you give them the tools to remain an introvert in their house? Or do you work with them to come out into the world and find comfort in it and find ways to relate with it?
Well, and here's the thing. Introverts aren't people who don't like being around people. Introverts are just people who need a certain amount of time to recharge their batteries on their own. I would say the people who really enjoyed the pandemic, because some of them were my patients, were those who are on the autism spectrum, and they really felt like, okay, the pressure is off, and they could just, you know, for them that sterile environment was very comforting and soothing because there was, they don't like the stimulation. They don't like the distraction. They like just one thing to focus on at a time. So for a lot of people on the spectrum, it was a relief. But for everyone else, I think, the messy, dirty, complicated, unpredictable, spontaneous, flowy kind of reality was much more satisfying, and we missed it. And we might not have known that we missed it, but we missed it. And as soon as it was available to us again, without even consciously seeking it out, we ran. We didn't walk. We like ran in droves for it. Like we like, like how people are running away from a volcanic eruption in the movies. That's how fast people were running toward whatever real life experiences they could have.
Eating on a patio when it first
Yes.
opened, going to a
Yes.
store when stores
Yeah.
reopened,
Yeah.
all these activities, and even things that you could order all your groceries online and they came pretty quick and the price wasn't
Yeah.
that different, but like, I don't know, get me back to a no frills was kind of the way I was feeling. For those listeners not
Yeah. I want to go and look
no
at the
frills.
broccoli up close and
The
like
avocado.
I
Can
want
you
to squeeze it.
you
Yeah.
can't trust an avocado that you don't
Yeah.
touch.
Yeah,
Um,
and touch, right? You can't touch and you can't smell. And those
yeah.
senses are very like they're deep and kind of more primitive senses that are connected to memory. They're connected to emotions. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that's connected to memory and senses, and it's right next to our olfactory center. So what we smell brings up feelings and memories. And if we can't smell anything, it's sterile, right? If we can't touch it, it's sterile. So yeah, I missed that part of the pandemic, is just, being able to touch and feel and smell things like a human being, like an animal that we are, right?
Right, and I think that's it. It's this, on the one hand, the digital future kind of promises this perfectionism through technology, and deals with the flaws, the messy parts, right? Cleans them up. But the messy parts are all we have.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
That's life.
Yeah, that's the good stuff. And I think that's the mistake that these gurus are making, these tech gurus are making, is that people want us to get rid of all those things that actually give soul
Mhm.
to life, right? All the things, all the dirt, all the mess, the shadow, like in our personalities, my patients come to me and they say, I want to be perfect. And I go, no, first of all, it's not possible. Second of all, it's not necessary. Third of all, it takes all the fun away from life. You want to have the dark stuff. You don't want to necessarily just give it free reign, but it informs you. It makes you passionate. It makes you, persistent. It makes you powerful. Like, you want that dark part. You want the dirty parts. You want the messy parts. Obviously you have to live in society with other people and other creatures and not be a sociopath, but the darkness is not a bad thing. It's just a different flavor. There's no bad energy. There's no bad smells. There's no bad feelings, right? We have to integrate all of it. And when they try to take away all that dirty stuff, as a psychiatrist, I'm horrified because they're dehumanizing us. They're taking away our true animal nature, which is, I think, the best part of us, and they're making us, just these like brains in a box. And then we won't need our bodies. And that,
Right.
again, that's like out of a horror movie, right? And this is not a direction I would ever want to go in.
Yeah, and I wonder, from a psychiatric perspective, like for someone who holds that as a core belief, that idea that we should move beyond the body, or we
Yeah.
can continually improve and perfect, because I
Yeah.
think there's that notion of
Yeah.
you know uh, this perfection is achievable, or
Yeah.
some sort of perfect state.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the people who get obsessive plastic surgery, but to this sort of societal degree. I mean, what is the underlying issue there? What I don't know what the underlying pathology is.
Well, it's an interesting question. And I think, I can only guess off the top of my head, but I think some of it is like this kind of self hatred, right? This hatred of our own vulnerability, fallibility, imperfection, our own shadow
Mhm.
side, the darkness within us, and trying, rather than trying to integrate it and make it, part of the whole, we're just trying to cut it away. It's like people who self-mutilate, like you were saying,
Mm.
like the plastic surgery. I think that's a very good example because we're like trying to cut away the parts of ourselves that we find, offensive, rather than claiming them, accepting them, integrating them, and finding the positive aspects of them. So to me, it's a real rejection of everything human about us, and very, very dangerous actually as a philosophy. And it also strikes me as slightly fascistic because anytime, you know, governments or societies sought out quote unquote perfection, then the first thing they started doing was rounding up and killing all of those individuals who were less than
Right.
perfect. You
Well, it's
know,
interesting because Peter Thiel, the
yes,
the co-founder of PayPal with
yeah,
Elon Musk,
yes.
the investor and board member of Facebook, the funder of neo-fascism in Europe and in
There you go.
America and
There you
elsewhere,
go. There
is
you
one of
go.
the biggest proponents of transhumanism. Right, this
Yeah,
belief that our destiny lies in, one, eliminating death and living forever, and then two, merging our brains and minds with computers so that we can exist in this perpetual matrix bullshit that he's doing while he's funding, Hungarian fascism.
yeah. I don't know if you've ever watched this show called Altered Carbon. It's a
No.
okay. It's on Netflix. I highly recommend season one if they still have it. It was brilliant because it's about a lot of things, but it's about people who have figured out through alien technology how to live forever,
Mm.
by basically implanting this chip in your brain. And the chip is you. So you can implant this chip in any body, which they call I don't know, I can't remember, some kind of a package, a container. But as once you've had this chip, you can be, revived anytime you get killed. And if you are rich enough, you can clone your body, and so you can have a bunch of cloned shells that you just, plug the chip into, and then you can just live forever and ever. And what the moral of the story is that if you can live forever, then you have no reason to have any ethics, any
Right.
morals, any sense of right and wrong, because there are no consequences because you can live forever. And so these people are doing the most horrendous atrocities. And they've even created like clubs for these people to do these atrocities on victims who they promise eternal life to, but of course
I'm just going to
don't.
stick with your summary because it sounds horrifying.
Watch it, and I
Wow.
recommend all the listeners to watch it, because the point is that when you can live forever and when your fundamental humanity, which is the fact that you have a time limit, is taken away, then you're capable of anything. And so all of these philosophies like this
Transhumanism.
transhumanism
Yeah.
and immortality, basically what they're saying is, we're making the Superman, which again is a fascist ideology, right?
Nietzschean.
And
Yeah.
it's very, very scarily dangerous. And I think it goes along with what's happening in our society today, which is the rise of all this highly right-wing, scary propaganda. So, if not to say that technology is associated with fascism at all, I don't want anyone to
No,
to
there
make
are
that
lots of
connection.
analog fascists going back.
Right. And there are lots of people who enjoy many aspects of technology who are very progressive. But I think that particular strain of thought is very dangerous. And we have to see it for what it is and
Yeah.
recognize that when we start looking for perfection, we're going down a very scary
Well,
path.
there's an analogy there to this kind of messianic faith, right? And I think this gets back to this question of this sort of strong belief in this inevitability of a digital future. Because what does digital promise? And let's forget about the brain,
Yeah.
that sort of sci-fi stuff, but even just the everyday,
Yeah.
In business or whatever, it's like digital promises a certainty. It works or it doesn't. It's very binary. And it promises to improve things and make things faster and more efficient, make more money and save you money and so on and so forth. And that's a very appealing thing for a company or an organization or a government or an individual or a family, because it gives a sense of certainty in a world where certainty is never really there, other than the sun rising and paying taxes, right? And a cat interrupting a Zoom call, obviously. And that attraction of that certainty is a powerful, powerful thing. And I think when people see it questioned and they see it challenged and they see it unfulfilled, it really is, a difficult thing. I mean, I know people who are very big into the sort of world of cryptocurrency and believed in it very strongly, and beyond the financial hit they've taken, like this collapse of this sort of ideology of a certain future has been really a difficult thing for them to process.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think people look for certainty because life is very uncertain, except for you missed one thing, death. So the sun rises, there are taxes, and there's death, and that's a
No.
certainty.
I've taken the
Yeah.
pure blood infusions with the.
Oh, okie
I'm not looking
dokie.
back.
Okay, well, good for you. All right. I'll talk to you in 300 years. Okay. But see if you're really happy with that
I'll
choice.
just be at the yacht club version. I'm not going to go to the murder club. But,
Okie dokie. But I think that we are, terrified of things that are certain, and we are terrified of things that are uncertain, and we want to control. We always want to control. Like humanity, our biggest you know mistake is trying to control the uncontrollable. And then when we do that, we create bigger problems for ourselves. And I think that this kind of hyper technology is this desire to control the uncontrollable, and it's uncontrollable for a reason. And when we start trying to meddle with fate, right, meddle with life and death, or meddle with humans and cyborgs, we're going to create horror stories, I think.
or be unfulfilled, be unhappy, right?
Yes, at the best, just be really unhappy and not have the life that we thought we would have. So, yeah, it's simple little things like you were saying, like getting out for a walk or playing a board game or talking to people in person, having your drinks party, even in the backyard if you don't want to be indoors, right? Like
Backyard's
there are
great.
still, and enjoy a lot of analog experiences and the messy, dirty, spontaneous, and unpredictable and imperfect, but fulfilling.
Amen to that. Well, This is great. I mean, I know where you were like at the beginning of the conversation. You were like, well, I wanted to ask about this chapter and this chapter, and we just kind of went on a beautiful, messy, human, unplanned, journey of a conversation. But I can think of no one better to do it with. So.
Thank you, David. Well, listen, I'm going to say goodbye to you now because I know you have to run.
I
And
have to take a child to swim class. Is there anything more dirty and messy and banal than swim class?
and beautiful and
I mean,
fulfilling.
for
Yeah.
someone, for the guy who owns the swim school.
And your kid, hopefully.
And she's a great swimmer, so
There you go.
that's kind of all that matters. Yeah.
Thank you again, David Sax. The future is analog, and it's available everywhere if people are interested. And where can people find you if they're looking to learn more about what you do? And
I mean, aside from knocking on my door, which obviously would go along well with the theme of the conversation, I have a website, saxdavid.com, so you can email me there. I'm on Twitter at saxdavid if you want to contact me there, shout to the world, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right.
Out in the world. Find me on the street. Find me at the swim school.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thank you for listening. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com, where you'll learn about upcoming online events as well. Also, we love getting referrals from our listeners about future podcast guests. So please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com.